Hello everyone, Ember here, and welcome back to a new video. In this one, I'd like to take a look at a Wugtrio budget deck that's been, well, honestly, very much updated in the most recent sets, Black Bolt and White Flare. So if you've been following this channel for quite some time, you might be aware that I've not always been the biggest believer in Wugtrio. In fact, you could say I'm a little bit of a hater, if you will. And this is primarily just because I've had terrible luck with this card in the past. You know, like trying it out with double turbo energy, with like Cherrim as energy acceleration, all that good stuff. And yeah, Wugtrio would just sit there and do 3 tails every single game, or most of the time at least, and it was just a bit rough. And you know, I would always feel bummed out when other YouTubers claimed it was super broken and all the rest of it, and then I would try Wugtrio and he would just not perform very well. So yeah, rough times. However, Wugtrio has had a sizable buff that we'll talk about shortly. So Wugtrio for 3 colorless energy, Undersea Tunnel says flip 3 coins, and for each heads you get to mill the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. Now, you'll notice a key flaw with this card right away. You're never taking any of your prize cards. So if you prize a lot of energy, that is kind of a problem. So you should probably run things like Redeemable Ticket as well in your Wugtrio builds, just to be able to get back some energy just in case, because your energy is how many times you get to mill your opponent effectively. And this is also assuming you flip multiple heads, because if you flip 1 heads throughout the entire game and just 2 tails, then you're not going to win. Like, you're just not. So, you know, you do need to max out your chances of actually flipping heads. So Wugtrio's main problem originally was that you only had reverse energy and double turbo. And the thing with that is you could only ever attack 4 times, basically, with reverse energy. And your opponents very quickly realized that if they didn't take a prize card, you couldn't do anything. So you were just sitting there waiting for them to actually take a KO, which is really annoying. So you could do silly things, like you could pair it up with Dusclops and like force them to take a prize while doing 50 damage poke, but for the most part, it was just a terrible way of playing Wugtrio. But then finally, they added Ignition Energy, which you only get 1 use out of it, which, you know, isn't the end of the world. Wugtrio is probably not going to tank a hit anyway. But this basically provides the exact same thing, 3 colorless energy. You just have to discard it at the end of your turn. So typically, as a pro tip, you know, from some experience with Wugtrio, I will say that you should try and use the Ignition Energy first, and then go through your reverse energy. Just because in the mid to late game, your opponent is more likely to have a bench sitter or a Pokemon that you can gust up and try and trap a bit. So then you'll be able to get more uses out of reverse energy. And, you know, in the earlier turns, your Ignition Energy will get discarded, your Wugtrio gets KO'd, that's absolutely fine. But you will more likely get, you know, more uses out of reverse energy, at least later on in the game. So as for the other Pokemon in the deck, also playing Dudunsparce, which is the draw engine for this build, you know, just want to chain through these. And the main theory here is that even though we're drawing a lot of cards with runaway draw, we really don't care that much because we're not going to deck out before our opponent. You know, that's the plan. At least, you know, if you're decking out before your opponent, then something's gone horribly wrong with the deck. So, yeah, you know, we really don't care about the draw 3. That's just kind of there to get us to our energy because there's not many efficient ways of really finding it. Also playing a single baby Pokemon, Team Rocket's Chingling. I don't think you have to play it. This was a Japanese list, by the way, that I copied and tried out. So, like, you don't have to play this. I think, like, a Shaman is probably a good idea in this build. But also, it has Free Retreat, which is nice, and then Chimming Commotion, discard a random card from your opponent's hand. To be honest, I don't think it's that powerful, like, not in this day and age, not when draw power is super busted as it is. Like, maybe if your opponent has a really small hand size, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to Team Rocket's Chingling this turn. But, like, typically your opponent can just boss KO your Wugtrio or something, so it's not, like, super useful. So I'll probably end up removing that soon for a Shaman, just so this deck can, like, actually beat spread decks. But, yeah. Otherwise, you know, things like Enzorg or what's the other big spread attacker in standard right now? Oh yeah, Gardevoir can just really run away with things. Like, I don't think this deck can really beat Gardevoir anyhow, but you know, it would at least give you a bit more of a fighting chance if you had Shaman in your deck. So yeah, I do like Shaman quite a bit. As for the trainers, it's really nothing too crazy. A lot of energy removal and disruption because it's that weird soft spot where, like, you're trying to slow down your opponent, but obviously you want them to take a prize card so you can trigger reverse energy. But, you know, at the same time, we also want them to, like, play resources right. We want them to, like, work for their KOs. But at the same time, we don't want to disrupt them too much, if that makes sense. So, yeah, also playing things like 2 Countercatcher. I've seen a lot of builds play, like, 4 copies of this. Like, it's a good card, but in all honesty, a lot of players out there are quite smart with what Pokemon they bench as soon as they see a Wiglett. So, like, I don't think gusting up a Pokemon is like an entirely reliable strategy in this day and age. Like, there's only one copy of Boss in this list as well. So, further proof of that. Just try and be as like consistent as possible first, and then like work in some ways of gusting up Pokemon and stalling for a bit. But things like Gravity Gemstone are really useful, especially since this is an Arven build. Also got Handheld Fan, which could be quite disruptive, like especially in against things like Typhlosion and Charizard, where there's only like 5 or 6 energy in their deck anyhow. So you might be able to just remove enough with Hammers and Handheld Fan and O, which is great. Also got in this deck the new Hilda supporter. Search your deck for an evolution Pokemon and an energy card. Typically, this will be for things like Dunsparce, just the extra draw 3, but you can also, of course, just get a Wugtrio if you really want to guarantee it, and you also can just get your energy that you want for that turn. So, yeah, definitely really like Hilda. My only complaint is that there's not a ton of deck space in here, so maybe more Hilda would be nice. Pokemon League HQ hasn't actually been that useful for me in games. I'm like debating whether or not this is really necessary in this format. Like, sure, Raging Bolt is a bit of an issue, and like always increasing attacks of other basic Pokemon is nice, like Miraidon and Zekrom and things. But overall, they're not like super popular decks on the ladder, and I have to wonder if maybe there could be a better disruptive stadium to use, or things like Artisan. Just encourage your player, your opponent, I should say, to like deck out a bit or something. Or use Academy at night, so you can protect your energy from your hand, so you don't get Iono them away and stuff like that. So, all things to consider really. But I would definitely keep this A spec neutralization zone. Like, you could play Prime Catcher, but I think this is a better win condition than Prime Catcher. Like, it just basically says your Pokemon don't take any damage. Is that what it says? Yeah, prevent all damage. I know what my cards do. Yeah, prevent all damage done to Pokemon that don't have a rule box by your opponent's Pokemon that have a rule box. So, yeah, it's quite a nice effect to have. Of course, it can be bumped quite easily by other stadiums in the game. But if you go up against an opponent that has 2 or 3 stadiums in their deck, you bump them all with League HQ, then Neutralization Zone suddenly becomes a good win condition. So that's nice. As for the supporters, like again mentioned, only 1 copy of Boss, 2 Research, 4 Arven, 3 Iono, 1 Eri, which is quite nice. Like, in theory, more Eri would be ideal, just to discard switches, so that Gust stall win condition can actually be a thing. But I think, to be honest, if you really want to try that out, like, honestly, maybe a Maractus might be okay in this deck, because the text on Reverse NG says you can just attach it to any Pokemon, like it provides 1 colors. So you could, in theory, just play a Maractus and try and like Gust stall something out for the rest of the game, basically. But typically, when your opponent gets down to 6 or 9 cards, you just want to hope the Wugtrio delivers. But yeah, I do honestly think, like, to wrap up my thoughts here, I do think Wugtrio is a lot better than it used to be. There's definitely a lot more chances for you to like actually win games, and I am like a bit more consistently winning games with Wugtrio, which is good. But I still think overall this deck kind of lacks the oomph, I guess, to really succeed. And it's also quite dependent on your opponent doing some horrible misplays. Like, if your opponent just doesn't really bench anything that you can stall or trap with, or anything like that, or if your opponent just opens with a decent Pokemon that can actually attack, then it's kind of just over, because your opponent can just sit there and attack with that 1 Pokemon and just not play any cards whatsoever. So if you want to know how to beat Wugtrio, just start the game with a Pokemon that you can actually attack with, and then do nothing else. Just attack with that Pokemon, and you will win. So yeah, Wugtrio. It's fun. It is a fun deck. Like, I do enjoy it as a budget deck. I'm slowly building a Wugtrio build IRL. I'm not sure if I'll use the Dunsparce. Probably use Dracoloak, but yeah, a very fun deck. Would recommend trying it out if you haven't tried it out already. But I guess this is my seal of approval that it's at least a bit better than it was. Like, it's not great or anything, but it's still better as Wugtrio decks go, and it's nice to be able to play a single price deck in Standard right now, because we just have so many, like Ethan's Typhlosion, which, like Ethan's Typhlosion has a good time against Goldengo and Raging Bolt, but against a lot of the other decks, it still just gets like absolutely annihilated and can't keep up and doesn't have like the damage output yet. So, it's nice that we have another single price deck that you can play on the ladder. At least like evens the playing field a bit. We're not doing damage at all. We don't need to worry about doing 330 damage. We just need to worry about actually flipping heads. So, it'd be great if they reprinted something like Glimwood Tangle to help us reflip coins. But yeah, I've kind of rambled on enough with this deck profile. So Yeah, let me know what you think about Wugtrio down below. Do you think it has a shot at winning the World Championships? And yeah, thank you for watching.